Hi everyone, I'm a professor of psychology. My name's Winifred Lewis. I recorded these interviews with Professor Rothbard in April to June 2021, and then for a variety of reasons we didn't release them until now, a year later. One of the things that's happened in that time is that the war in the Ukraine has broken out, and I thought it would be interesting to go through those lessons thinking about the Ukraine or Syria or any other war that you might be interested in. So we can see from the first video that the physical violence is just part of the system of violence, and that we need to think about dehumanization, which is a psychological violence where other people are considered to be permittable to bomb their civilians, to engage in war crimes against their populations. And of course, not everyone participates in those war crimes and bombings, but the dehumanizing language and stereotypes often do spread through the population to empower people to take these acts. Then we can look at peace and we can understand it's not just a stop to the war that we need, although we do want that, but we need to think about how people will be able to tell the stories of the past in a truth and reconciliation process where survivors get to speak out, and how perpetrators of war crimes might be brought to justice. We can also think about how people will need dialogues to solve those grievances in the present, dialogues that will give rise to a peace treaty at a point in time, and that will also allow other grievances after the peace treaty to be discussed, with systems of communication that allow those future communications to occur. Because as Professor Rothbard said, 50% of the peace treaties will last 5 years. That means that the others will not. And one of the features that will determine whether they last is whether those communication systems are in place and whether those narratives of dehumanization are allowed to persist or are challenged. Actions that state actors take include the peacekeeping, disarming militias and soldiers, demobilizing them, returning them to civilian life, and reintegrating them into the economy. And the risks of participating in a war like this for all the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of combatants are that the violence will be carried forward in the future and it will make future war more likely. So we need attention to that. Then we have this peace-building agenda, which includes reconciliation and prosecution of war crimes. It includes attention to human security, including not just physical safety, but also poverty relief and healthcare and so on. That includes interactive conflict resolution like dialogues, and it includes democratization, at least so many believe. Not because democracies never engage in war, but because having a dictator is a risk factor for war and for longer wars, because they're less responsive to what the people want. We can also look at local grassroots organizations and how they participate in solving problems like reintegration of soldiers and creating peace in communities, creating new economic systems, and so on. And we can look at international NGOs like the Red Cross that do the same. And then we can look at those big lessons that Professor Rothbard talked about in the final video. We can see that, yes, we might have certain genes or a dictator might be in power, but that can be in place for decades of peace and then again decades after the war is finished. So it's not these big picture factors alone like our genes or our political systems that need attention. We can look at these specific risk factors like seeing other people as animals. Rage is a risk, zero-sum thinking where my loss is your gain or vice versa. And we can look at the actions of state actors in building peacekeeping and peace-building agendas, but we can also look at how grassroots organizations and people create a culture of peace that includes compassion and that allows those narratives in the future to go beyond blaming one side, although one side may be more to blame, but looking at how grievances and systems have been allowed to reach this point, looking beyond any individual person or group to look at the whole context and try and change that context. I'll be curious to see your comments.